Before the light bulb worked, before the traffic signal existed, before refrigerated trucks carried food across the country, there were black inventors who made those breakthroughs possible. They filed patents, won lawsuits, and built technologies that changed daily life for millions of Americans. But here is the part that most history books leave out. Many of those inventors had their work taken from them, sometimes by law, sometimes by force, and sometimes by men whose names you already know. To understand how this happened and why it kept happening for over a century, we need to go back to a time when a vast population of brilliant minds was legally forbidden from owning an idea. The year was 1793, and inside the Capitol building in Philadelphia, the United States Congress had just passed the Patent Act. On paper, it was a straightforward law. If you invented something new and useful, you could file a patent, and that patent protected your right to profit from your creation. It was one of the founding principles of American innovation. The idea was simple. You build it, you own it. There was just one problem. The law said patents could be granted to any person. And in 1793, enslaved black people were not legally considered persons. They were classified as property. That single legal distinction created a loophole so wide that it swallowed an entire era of black genius whole. Think about what that meant in practice. If an enslaved man working in a blacksmith's forge or a plantation workshop invented a new tool, a new machine, a new method of doing something faster or better, he could not patent it. He had no legal standing. The invention, like the man himself, belonged to whoever owned him. And the irony was brutal, because the very skills that made enslaved people valuable as laborers, their mechanical ingenuity, their problem-solving ability, their intimate knowledge of the iron tools and cotton gins and plows they used every day, those same skills produced innovations that their enslavers were eager to exploit. That is exactly what happened over and over again on plantations and in workshops across the American South. One of the earliest documented cases involved an enslaved blacksmith named Ned, who worked on a Mississippi cotton plantation owned by a man named Oscar Stewart. Ned spent his days at the forge shaping iron tools for the fields, and he had spent years studying the mechanics of cotton processing. Around 1850, he designed an improved cotton scraper, a tool that could harvest cotton more efficiently than anything else available at the time. Planters across the Mississippi Delta heard about it and wanted one. Stewart recognized the commercial value immediately. He traveled to the United States Patent Office in Washington and tried to file for the patent in his own name. The clerks at the patent office looked at the application, investigated the claim, and rejected it. Stewart had not invented the cotton scraper. Ned had, and the examiners knew it. But here is where the law revealed its cruelty. Stewart could not list Ned as the inventor either, because Ned was enslaved. He had no legal identity. The result was a kind of bureaucratic purgatory. The invention worked, people wanted it, and it clearly deserved patent protection. But it could not be claimed by anyone. It fell into a void, belonging to no one on paper and benefiting everyone except the man who actually created it. Ned's story was not unique. It was the template for how the system handled black innovation for decades. A few hundred miles east, on a sprawling cotton plantation in Davis Bend, Mississippi, owned by a man whose name would later become synonymous with the Confederacy, another enslaved inventor was running into the same wall. His name was Benjamin Montgomery, and his enslaver was Jefferson Davis. Montgomery was, by any honest measure, a remarkable engineer. He had taught himself to read and write at a time when that act alone could get an enslaved person beaten or killed. He had studied hydraulics and mechanical design by observing the plantation's machinery, and by reading every technical document he could find in Davis's library. And he had invented a boat propeller specifically designed for navigating the shallow, unpredictable waters of the Mississippi River, where steamboats with conventional propellers kept getting tangled in debris and running aground on sandbars. It was a practical solution to a real transportation problem, and it worked beautifully. River pilots who tested the propeller on steamboats along the Mississippi Delta were impressed. Davis, recognizing the value, tried to patent the propeller under his own name. The patent office in Washington rejected this application as well. Davis had not invented it, and the examiners were not willing to pretend otherwise. Montgomery spent the next 15 years unable to claim his own creation. It was not until after the Civil War, after emancipation, after the passage of the 14th Amendment, that he was finally able to walk up the marble steps of the patent office as a free citizen and file the paperwork himself. He received his patent in 1868, nearly 2 decades after he had built the original prototype in a workshop on Jefferson Davis's plantation. 2 decades. An entire generation passed while someone else's invention sat in legal limbo because the inventor's humanity was not recognized by law. Now, you might think that after emancipation, after the Reconstruction Amendments were ratified in Washington, the playing field would have leveled out, that free black inventors could simply file their patents and compete on equal terms. And technically, on paper, that became possible. But the theft of black inventions did not stop with emancipation. It just evolved. The mechanisms became subtler, the paperwork cleaner, and the erasure more complete. Consider the case of Granville T. Woods, one of the most prolific black inventors of the 19th century. Woods was born in Columbus, Ohio in 1856. He was largely self-educated, picking up electrical engineering through a combination of night courses at a local college, hands-on railroad work, and sheer relentless curiosity. He studied every electrical system he could access, took apart machines to understand their components, and spent years building his knowledge from the ground up. By his early 30s, Woods had invented something extraordinary. He called it the multiplex telegraph, and what it did was allow telegraph messages to be sent through the same wires to and from moving trains. Before Woods, there was no reliable way for a locomotive speeding down the tracks to communicate with a station or with another train on the same line. This was not just an inconvenience. It was a deadly safety crisis. Trains collided on the open rails regularly because they had no way to coordinate in real time. Engineers and conductors were essentially operating blind once the locomotive left the station. Woods solved the problem. He filed his patent in 1887 and began manufacturing the device through his own company, the Woods Electrical Company, which he operated out of Cincinnati. That is when Thomas Edison showed up. Edison, working out of his famous laboratory in Menlo Park, already the most celebrated inventor in America, filed a lawsuit claiming that he had invented the multiplex telegraph first and that Woods had stolen his idea. Woods gathered his documentation, his prototypes, and his records, took the case to a federal courtroom, and W won. Edison filed a second lawsuit, arguing the same claim from a different angle. Woods won again. At that point, Edison shifted tactics. Instead of trying to beat Woods in court, he offered him a job. "Come work for me," Edison proposed, "and your future inventions will have the backing of the biggest electrical company in the country." The implication was clear. Your future patents will carry my company's name, not yours. Woods said no. He continued inventing independently and eventually held more than 60 patents across electrical engineering, including improvements to the telephone transmitter, the streetcar system, and the automatic air brake for trains. But his name never entered the mainstream the way Edison's did. The textbooks chose Edison. The museums chose Edison. The cultural memory of American invention chose Edison. Woods became a footnote in a story that he had helped write. And Woods was not the only black inventor who found himself overshadowed by Edison's legend. Lewis Latimer's story might be the most consequential example of all. Latimer was born in 1848 in Chelsea, Massachusetts. His parents had escaped enslavement in Virginia, and his father had been the subject of a famous freedom case defended by Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison. Growing up in that household, Latimer inherited a fierce sense of self-determination. He served in the Union Navy during the Civil War, and afterward, he taught himself mechanical drafting, spending hours at a drafting table perfecting the art of translating three-dimensional inventions into precise ink drawings on paper. He became so skilled that he was hired by a patent law firm in Boston. The firm trusted him with some of the most important patent illustrations in American history, including the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell's 1876 telephone patent was drafted by Lewis Latimer. The precise technical drawings that convinced the patent office to approve Bell's claim, the visual proof that the device would work as described, came from Latimer's hand. Without those drawings, the patent application might have been denied or delayed, and the timeline of telecommunications could have unfolded very differently. But Latimer's most important contribution came a few years later, and it involved the invention that would come to define Thomas Edison's legacy. Edison had created the incandescent light bulb in 1879. The problem was that Edison's original bulb used a bamboo filament that burned out in a matter of hours, sometimes minutes. The light bulb existed as a concept, but it was not commercially viable. It was essentially a fragile novelty that could not survive regular use. Latimer solved the problem. He developed a carbon filament, and critically, a process for manufacturing it reliably and at scale. His 1881 patent for the process of manufacturing carbons was the breakthrough that turned the light bulb from a laboratory curiosity into something you could actually install in a home and expect to keep working night after night. Edison recognized the value immediately. He hired Latimer to join his team at the Edison Electric Light Company in Menlo Park, New Jersey. Latimer went on to become one of the original members of the Edison Pioneers, an elite group of the company's top scientists and engineers. He also wrote Incandescent Electric Lighting, the first textbook ever published on the subject in 1890. And yet, when people talk about who invented the light bulb, they say Edison. When school children learn about innovation in America, they learn about Edison, the carbon filament that made the entire thing commercially viable, the contribution without which you would not be watching this on a screen illuminated by electric light right now. That part of the story gets a footnote at best. Latimer did not have his invention stolen in the crude legal sense. He received his patent, he was credited within the company, but the larger cultural narrative absorbed his contribution into Edison's legend and kept moving. And that kind of erasure is its own form of theft. Meanwhile, across the Great Lakes region, another black inventor was building a legacy. So respected that his name became part of the English language itself. Elijah McCoy was born in 1844 in Colchester, Ontario. His parents had escaped enslavement in Kentucky through the Underground Railroad, crossing rivers at night and moving through hidden safe houses along secret routes until they reached the Canadian border. McCoy showed mechanical aptitude from childhood, constantly taking apart household items and reassembling them. His parents saved enough money to send him to Edinburgh, Scotland, where he studied mechanical engineering at one of the finest institutions in Europe. No American university would accept a black student for engineering studies at the time, so Scotland became his path to a formal education. When McCoy returned to the United States after the Civil War, he settled in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and looked for engineering work. Despite holding a degree from a prestigious European university, the only position available to him was fireman on the Michigan Central Railroad, the person who shoveled coal into the steam locomotive boiler for hours at a stretch. It was back-breaking, low-status work that had nothing to do with engineering. But McCoy used his access to the locomotives to study a persistent problem that plagued every steam-powered railroad in the country. Steam engines required constant lubrication. Without regular oiling, the moving parts would overheat, grind against each other, and eventually seize up completely. The standard practice was to stop the train periodically, shut down the engine, and manually apply oil to each component by hand. This was slow, expensive, and it caused delays that rippled across the national rail network. Every stop for lubrication meant late arrivals, missed connections, and lost revenue. McCoy invented an automatic lubrication cup, a device that dripped oil continuously onto the engine's moving parts while the train was still in motion. That meant the trains could keep running without stopping for manual oiling, covering longer distances while the engine stayed lubricated in real time. It was a simple concept that produced staggering results, and McCoy's engineering made it work flawlessly. He received his first patent for the device in 1872. It was an immediate sensation. Railroad companies across the country wanted it installed on their locomotives, and inevitably, competitors tried to copy it. Dozens of imitation lubrication cups flooded the market over the following years. Some were crude knockoffs, built from rough approximations of McCoy's design. Others were more sophisticated attempts by established manufacturers, but none of them matched the original. The engineering precision, the reliability of the oil flow, the consistency under different speeds and temperatures, it could not be duplicated by someone who did not fully understand the underlying mechanics. Railroad engineers started specifying which lubrication system they wanted installed. They began asking purchasing agents for the real McCoy. That phrase, still part of everyday English more than 150 years later, originated with a black inventor in Michigan, whose name most Americans have never been taught. McCoy went on to hold over 50 patents in his lifetime, covering improvements to the lubrication system, the ironing board, and the lawn sprinkler. He founded his own manufacturing company and continued inventing well into his 70s. But like Latimer, like Woods, his name was gradually detached from his work. As the decades passed, the phrase survived. The man behind it faded from public memory.
Now, let me tell you about an inventor whose creation you encounter almost every day, whether you realize it or not. Garrett Morgan was born in Paris, Kentucky in 1877, one of 11 children in a family that had very little money, but a deep respect for education and hard work. He moved to Cleveland, Ohio as a teenager, and he quickly established himself as a self-taught mechanical mind, repairing sewing machines and eventually opening his own shop. His first major invention was a breathing device, a protective hood that filtered smoke, dust, and toxic gases from the air. It was ingenious in its simplicity. The hood used a wet sponge as a filter and a long tube that drew cleaner air from near the ground, where smoke and fumes tend to be less concentrated. Morgan got the chance to demonstrate his device in the most dramatic way possible in 1916. A tunnel being constructed beneath Lake Erie exploded, trapping over 30 workers underground in a space filling rapidly with smoke and natural gas. Rescue teams tried to enter the tunnel and were driven back by the fumes. Workers were dying while the people above ground watched helplessly. Someone remembered Garrett Morgan and his breathing hood. Morgan and his brother Frank arrived at the scene, strapped on their devices, descended into the tunnel, and began carrying survivors out on their backs. They made multiple trips into that toxic darkness, pulling men to safety who had been given up for dead. The city of Cleveland awarded Morgan a gold medal for bravery. Fire departments across the country placed orders for his breathing hood. But when Southern departments discovered that the inventor was a black man, many of them canceled their orders outright. Some departments refused to purchase the device at all, choosing to let their firefighters work without respiratory protection rather than buy a life-saving invention from a black person. If you are finding value in this history, take a moment and hit subscribe. This channel covers stories like this every week, the ones that deserve to be remembered and retold. Morgan kept inventing. In the early 1920s, he witnessed a violent collision at a busy Cleveland intersection between an automobile and a horse-drawn carriage. The accident was devastating and completely preventable. At the time, traffic signals had only two positions: stop and go. There was no buffer, no warning, no moment for drivers and pedestrians to clear the intersection before traffic surged from the other direction. Morgan designed and patented a three-position traffic signal that added what we now recognize as the yellow light. That third position created a transitional pause, a warning that gave everyone in the intersection a few critical seconds to react before the signal changed completely. He received his patent in 1923. General Electric approached him and purchased the rights for $40,000. In the 1920s, that was a meaningful sum of money, but it was a tiny fraction of what the technology was actually worth. General Electric went on to develop, manufacture, and deploy traffic signals based on Morgan's design across the country and eventually around the world. The three-position signal became the universal standard for traffic management on every continent. Morgan's name disappeared from the story completely. For decades, the history of traffic signal development credited General Electric engineers and various white inventors. Morgan's patent was a matter of public record, sitting right there in the files for anyone to look up. But nobody looked. He had been paid once. And in the eyes of the system, that settled the account. Frederick McKinley Jones may have saved more lives than any other inventor on this list, yet his name remains largely unknown outside engineering circles. Jones was born in Cincinnati in 1893. He was orphaned by the age of 9, raised partially by a priest, and had almost no formal education beyond the 6th grade. He became self-taught in electronics, mechanics, and engineering by reading technical manuals, taking apart machines, and rebuilding them until he understood every component. By the 1930s, Jones had moved to Halleck, Minnesota, and he had identified a problem that the transportation industry desperately needed solved. Long-haul trucks had no reliable way to keep their cargo cold over extended distances. Fruits and vegetables rotted in transit during summer months. Dairy products spoiled. Medical supplies degraded in the heat. Blood plasma, which was critical for surgeries and battlefield emergencies, could not be transported more than a short distance without losing viability. Jones invented the first practical automatic refrigeration unit designed specifically for long-haul trucks. It was compact, mechanically reliable, and strong enough to maintain consistent cold temperatures over hundreds of miles of rough highway driving. He received his patent in 1940 and co-founded a company called Thermo King with his business partner, a white entrepreneur named Joe Numero. During World War II, the United States military adopted Jones's refrigeration technology on a massive scale. His cooling units were mounted on Army transport trucks rolling across North Africa and Europe, keeping blood plasma, penicillin, and other critical medical supplies viable during transport to field hospitals behind the front lines. Battlefield medics and Army surgeons depended on refrigeration systems that Jones had designed from his workshop in rural Minnesota. Military historians have estimated that his portable cooling units played a role in saving thousands of soldiers' lives during the war by ensuring that perishable medical supplies reached combat zones intact. After the war, Thermo King grew into a major American corporation. The refrigerated trucking industry that Jones essentially created expanded into a multi-billion-dollar sector that transformed how food reaches grocery stores, how organs reach transplant hospitals, and how vaccines reach clinics in remote areas. The modern cold chain, the invisible system that keeps your produce fresh and your medicine effective, traces its origins directly back to Frederick McKinley Jones. Jones eventually held more than 60 patents across refrigeration, air conditioning, and portable cooling technology. In 1991, nearly 3 decades after his death in 1961, he became the first black man to be awarded the National Medal of Technology. But during his lifetime, the public face of Thermo King was Joe Numero. Numero handled the business side, gave the interviews, and appeared in the trade publications. Jones was the quiet inventor in the background, the man whose genius powered the whole operation but whose name rarely appeared in the press or in the public story of the company he co-founded. What connects all of these stories is not just individual injustice, it is architecture. The system was designed across multiple centuries and through multiple mechanisms to separate black inventors from their inventions. First came the legal prohibition. Enslaved people could not hold patents, so their ideas were either claimed by enslavers or lost to history forever. Then came the social barriers. Even after emancipation, black inventors faced discrimination that prevented them from accessing higher education, startup capital, manufacturing facilities, and competent legal representation. A man like Elijah McCoy had to leave his own country just to get an engineering degree. A man like Granville Woods had to defend his own patents in court against the richest inventor in America. Then came the economic pressure. Corporations like General Electric could approach a black inventor, purchase a patent for a flat fee, and erase the inventor's connection to the product forever. $40,000 for a technology worth hundreds of millions. A single check, a signed transfer of rights, and the name behind the invention vanished. And finally came the cultural erasure, the most durable mechanism of all. Textbooks in American schoolrooms, exhibits in the Smithsonian, documentaries on television, and popular histories on library shelves chose not to include black inventors in the story of American innovation. It was not always a deliberate conspiracy. Sometimes it was just the path of least resistance. Write about Edison because everyone already knows Edison. Write about Bell because Bell is already in the curriculum. Skip the names that require explanation, that complicate the clean narrative, that force uncomfortable questions about who really built what. Each mechanism reinforced the others. A man who could not get an engineering degree had to teach himself. A man who taught himself was taken less seriously by patent examiners and investors. A man taken less seriously had less leverage when a corporation came to negotiate for his patent. And a man with no leverage could be written out of history with a check, a handshake, and a silence that lasted generations. The inventions themselves survived every attempt to erase their creators. The cotton scraper, the boat propeller, the multiplex telegraph, the carbon filament, the automatic lubrication cup, the 3-position traffic signal, the portable refrigeration unit. All of them became part of the basic infrastructure of modern life. All of them changed how people work, travel, eat, communicate, and stay alive. But the names did not survive in the way they deserved. Not in the way that Edison's name survived, or Bell's, or Ford's, or any of the other white inventors who became household words. The black men who made those same breakthroughs were given footnotes instead of chapters, mentions instead of monuments, and quiet acknowledgments decades after their deaths, instead of recognition while they were still alive to receive it. What makes this history worth telling today is not the injustice alone, though the injustice was staggering.
It is the stubbornness of the genius underneath. Every inventor in this story faced a system that told them their ideas did not belong to them, that their minds were not their own, that their contributions would be absorbed and their names forgotten. And every single one of them kept inventing anyway. Granville Woods turned down Thomas Edison's job offer and went on to file 60 more patents. Elijah McCoy built his own company and invented until he was in his 70s. Lewis Latimer wrote the textbook that trained a generation of electrical engineers. Garrett Morgan saved lives underground in a poisoned tunnel before he ever filed a single patent. Frederick McKinley Jones, with a 6th grade education, invented a technology that transformed global food supply chains and kept soldiers alive on battlefields an ocean away from home. They did not wait for the system to recognize them. They simply kept building. And perhaps that is the part of this story that deserves the most attention. The theft was real and documented. The erasure was deliberate and lasting. But none of it, not the laws, the lawsuits, the canceled orders, or the stolen credit, was enough to stop them. The next time you sit at a traffic light and watch it turn from green to yellow, that pause exists because Garrett Morgan witnessed a collision on a Cleveland Street corner and decided to fix the problem. The next time you flip a light switch and the bulb holds steady, that light lasts because Lewis Latimer figured out how to make a filament that would not burn out in minutes. The next time you open a refrigerator on a delivery truck, that cold air flows because Frederick McKinley Jones spent years in a Minnesota workshop solving a problem that no one else could crack. Their names are in the patents. They have always been in the patents. The question was never whether they invented these things. The question was whether America was willing to remember. If this story stayed with you, this channel covers more chapters of Black history that were nearly lost. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one.